Today's video. Today is Saturday, November 2nd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the internal dynamics on Team Trump as Donald Trump's campaign team and himself build anxiety as they are 3 days out from the 2024 presidential election. Axios released this article earlier on today discussing how Donald Trump's anxiety builds with Election Day in sight. One thing that has been consistent from the campaign is that the Trump team has been under this assumption from the very beginning that they were on track for a landslide victory across the country, especially after that first presidential debate against President Joe Biden, which Donald Trump decisively won, at which it resulted in a number of new polls during the duration of June 27th onward before Kamala Harris entered into the race that showed Donald Trump in a very strong position. Now, this is an article from The Atlantic that discusses how Donald Trump's campaign on the internal side was privately celebrating months before the election, working under this assumption that the former president could do no further harm and could only be on track for an expansive and explosive victory across the country. Donald Trump's campaign team around this time started announcing investments into states like Minnesota and Virginia and New Mexico and New Hampshire, and started holding campaign rallies in states like New York and other safe Democratic states that went to show that Donald Trump's campaign team genuinely believed that they were on track for something greater than the 2016 presidential election. But as reality sets in and we get closer to the presidential race, Donald Trump himself seems to be anxious. Axios breaking down a number of internal reports from the Trump team discussing how Donald Trump's anxiety has resulted in aides frequently being questioned by him about his status, demanding that he does and they do more work across the country. Now, a number of battleground states have started to show a reversion in support away from Donald Trump in a way that has also made his campaign team quite anxious. Again, going from a position where the Donald Trump team had expected to have a complete and total landslide to a point now where the race is a true total toss-up, a lot of Republicans have come to realize that maybe they should have spent time worrying earlier on so they wouldn't be as pent up and stressed right before the election. And honestly, it makes sense, too. Donald Trump has made a number of missteps over the past week, most notably going to do campaign rallies in New Mexico and Virginia, and the fallout from the Madison Square Garden rally, in which we have seen a significant drop in support from Puerto Rican Americans across crucial battlegrounds that could actually land Donald Trump some losses in battleground states like Pennsylvania and other battlegrounds across the country like Nevada, Arizona, and even some likely Republican states like Florida, where you have high proportions of the population that are of Puerto Rican descent that could, in fact, swing an electorate quite tremendously, given some of the comments made at the Madison Square Garden rally. And so a big reason, too, that the Trump team, and we can break this down through a number of different points here, has built up anxiety, really can be summed up in three core tenets here. On one end, what we're finding is the turnout amongst men across the country shows quite abysmal results for the Republican Party. Now, keep in mind, Election Day turnout will in fact drive up the portion of the voter electorate that is comprised of men across the nation. Meaning that today, what is a 10-point delta in the gender gap in terms of turnout in battleground states will likely end up being somewhere around 2 to 3 points. Now, the question of that gender gap, and if it's larger than that, that bodes well for Kamala Harris, but the question of that is how these different demographic groups are actually voting. But it is a point of anxiety, given that right now Democrats are seeing some optimism in the gender gap in these early voting numbers. States like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, you are seeing that the numbers here show good results for the Democratic ticket and who's turning out to vote in the battlegrounds when it comes down to a breakdown strictly on gender. Another thing beyond just the male voter turnout concern here is these theatrics and stunts. High-profile rallies that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars that in some cases actually serve to the detriment of the Trump campaign. Now, I'm sure all of us have seen the spotlights here of Donald Trump driving a garbage truck, Donald Trump going to McDonald's. A lot of these PR stunts have started to question, whether or not these are actually making a difference in the election. And Donald Trump really went down that full total pathway when it came down to PR stunts and publicity when he invited a number of, celebrities in Donald Trump's eyes to his Madison Square Garden rally, people like Dr. Phil and comedians, and quote-unquote comedians, that make comments that have been largely seen now as racist and prejudiced from the Donald Trump stage. And these high-profile rallies being held in safe blue states or likely blue states don't really do a service to the Donald Trump campaign really in any regard. Granted, rallies are taken for granted in terms of how they sway swing state electorates, but it can't be understated just how negative this Madison Square Garden rally actually was, to a point where you even have places like Fortune writing about how Donald Trump blew a huge lead. Now, I would never be the first one to admit that a huge lead existed. I don't think it existed, but a lead did exist, and the Madison Square Garden rally absolutely did take a hit at it. Is it enough to sway the election in favor of Kamala Harris? Probably not. But it does go to show that of everything that's been working against the former president, this is yet again another instance of how the high-profile rallies and all of these, PR stunts sometimes actually backfire on the former president in a way that just simply doesn't make much of a difference. Not much of a difference to benefit him, rather, I should say. And the final thing here that I think is really fueling this anxiety is some of the internal polling numbers. Now, Tony Fabrizio, who is one of the most prominent Republican influencers, pollsters rather, across the country, says Donald Trump is in a stronger position than in 2020. But we have to remember what 2020 was. Well, it certainly wasn't this blowout for the Democratic Party. It was a pretty substantial victory in Michigan, which swung 4 points to the left, Pennsylvania, which swung 2 points to the left, Wisconsin, 2 points, Georgia, that shifted 6 points to the left. It was massive changes in a number of these key crucial states that really do show that even though Donald Trump might be polling better than 2020, what's the reality? And is it more than enough from 2020 to actually win the election? Another thing, too, is what the internal numbers are saying in some of the Trump states from the last cycle. Even though Donald Trump is campaigning in states like Virginia and New Mexico, you'd imagine that he would spend zero time in the states that he won back in 2020. For instance, he's spending a lot of time in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, states he lost in the last election, but one might argue that with this overconfidence and this level of campaigning into some likely blue states that were double-digit states for Biden, he might be solid in the states that he won last cycle. But I'd ask you to look no further than North Carolina, which is another issue that has actually been mentioned explicitly in Donald Trump's point of anxiety. The fact is that the state of North Carolina has been visited more than Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Wisconsin by the Trump team in these final stretches of the campaign period. And a big reason why that matters is because it goes to show that although North Carolina is a state Donald Trump won, there is something about their internal data that suggests that Donald Trump is not on track for a substantive victory. And I think it could be a combination of factors. On one end, you have very lackluster Republicans running in the statewide races. Mark Robinson was a real big hit to the Republican Party there. No substantive governor race, and Donald Trump really elevated Mark Robinson. You're already still seeing ads in North Carolina. If any of your viewers are from North Carolina, I'm sure you've seen some of these ads. But the elevation here point is that Donald Trump referred to Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor running for election here in the race likely to lose by double digits in North Carolina. He called Mark Robinson Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids. He called him Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids. Fast forward to right before the election, roughly a month ago. CNN breaks a report showing Mark Robinson referring to himself as a black Nazi. Now, Donald Trump is not campaigning with Mark Robinson anymore, and it is clear that he is distancing himself in a way that is quite tremendous, I will say, because given how closely in contact they were before, it's really fascinating. Donald Trump's political instincts there seem to be smart. Now, J.D. Vance recently called him a phenomenal lieutenant governor, whatever term he decided to use. Don't think that was helpful. It's already being run in ads. It's not helping the Trump team there, but J.D. Vance is not Donald Trump, and people don't typically vote on the VP picks or what they say. Barring Sarah Palin, doesn't really happen. When it comes down to this cycle, though, North Carolina is a point of interest for me because it does show that some of their numbers here, while they do say Donald Trump is in a better position than 2020, you have to ask, is it enough to win, though? Because better than 2020 could end up with a map like this, where Donald Trump was North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and even for the fun of it, Nevada, but Kamala Harris wins Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and that's enough to get her at 270. Just those three states alone. That is enough to win her the presidency. She could lose Georgia, which Biden won. She could lose Arizona, which Biden won. She could lose Nevada, which Biden won. She could even lose North Carolina, which based on the number of state visits, arguably is a lot closer than we otherwise think. And so Donald Trump visiting North Carolina is really interesting, given that the confidence from the MAGA circles really seemed to have been quite strong before, that is now plummeting into this phase of anxiety, building right up before the election. And so to recap here, what we're looking at, numbers aren't looking as great when it comes down to turnout amongst men across the nation. We are seeing that these PR stunts sometimes are backfiring, causing amounts of money being spent, even in some cases money being spent on saving that PR, churning out new ads, doing new things, getting the president to speak on different topics, the former president to speak on different topics that they otherwise never even had to discuss before. And then when it comes down to the final thing here, those internal polling numbers, the numbers that give Donald Trump the reason to visit North Carolina more than Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada, and Wisconsin. And although maybe in a way that's a display of confidence that Donald Trump's solid in those states, I can guarantee you this. If he's winning all of those four states, he's winning North Carolina. There would be no reason to go to all four of those states less than North Carolina, unless they believed that North Carolina was far more in reach for Kamala Harris's campaign than they otherwise are letting on when they're visiting states like Virginia and New Mexico. And he's saying to the press and he's saying to the people, today's Virginia rally, New Mexico was 2 days ago, that he's going to win those states, that him and his team believe genuinely that he is going to put these states into play. And when you look at who Donald Trump has surrounded himself by, I made this as a point earlier on today, because it matters. Donald Trump's campaign team has been a lot of yes men. It's been a lot of people who are unwilling to tell the former president, no, you can't win this state. Yes, you can win this state. And this is how we allocate resources and allocate time. While I do believe the former president for a while was on track to do very well in the election, especially when faced up against the incumbent president today, that's no longer the race they're running in. And given the campaign stops from August 5th to October 25th, it's clear the Kamala Harris campaign has deviated just a few times, at most, from the core 7 battleground states. New York fundraisers, California fundraisers, Chicago was the DNC, which is why Illinois is lit up. Maryland has a competitive Senate race, shout out Maryland, my home state, and Texas, the state that Kamala Harris did a rally in to tout the Beyonce endorsement. But beyond that, it has been clock in, clock out of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. The Trump team, however, add New Mexico to the list. What do you have? California, Montana, Colorado, Virginia, New York, Illinois, Alabama, Texas. States where Donald Trump isn't just doing fundraisers, unlike Kamala Harris, who has most explicitly done fundraisers in the states surrounding the 7 core battlegrounds. No, he's doing full-on rallies. He did one in Aurora, Colorado. He's doing one today over in Virginia. He did one recently in New Mexico. He's visiting these states very seriously, holding very serious rallies because he's trying to make an intentional effort to win these states. But what we know, and especially based on what the internal numbers are saying, there's no reason for that. The anxiety seems to be overcoming the Trump team because they were coming into this election, even recently, with this completely warped perception that it was not about winning the election, but by the margin they won by. We saw this in the way that people like Chris LaSavita, who even is directly mentioned in articles like this, talking about how Donald Trump is planning for a landslide victory, how there are Republicans surrounding the president, the former president. And I apologize for swinging back and forth because that could be confusing, given that Joe Biden is the president of the United States. But what we're working here with is the fact that Donald Trump has surrounded himself by members of the RNC, like Charlie Kirk, who run the entire ground game effort in a number of battleground states in conjunction with Elon Musk. That's Turning Point Action. That is a right-wing group put out there to elect the former president. When you take a look at who's really channeling that in, Charlie Kirk and Laura Trump, being a relative of Donald Trump, is co-chairing the RNC. Donald Trump has a family member running the Republican Party who's meant to be a separate entity and meant to completely do things on their own. That has now become one and the same, coupled into the Trump team, especially since that family tie is there. You are talking about people who will never once tell the former president that he could actually lose this election. Fast forward to who's running the Trump team, not even fast forward, just jump over and see who's running the Trump team. You do have people like Chris LaSavita and people from the 2016 and 2020 campaigns who have never told the former president, no, ever in his life. If he wants to do a rally in Virginia, he's doing a rally in Virginia. If he wants to open a field office in Minnesota, he's opening a field office in Minnesota. In fact, they announced 19 field offices between Minnesota and Virginia, and I would like to ask, if anyone's been around them or if anyone works with them, how are they going? How are these areas doing? Because what we know is that Kamala Harris will win both of those states. She'll win New Mexico. She'll win New York. She'll win California. All these states that Donald Trump did full-on rallies in because the people around him are telling him that he's going to win. But now reality's setting in. The election is far closer than the Trump team could have ever predicted. They believed that this election was going to be a landslide, and it is so clear, and they even said it verbatim. They believed this election to be a landslide earlier on. So now I wonder, with all of this on the side of the Trump team not assessing and not understanding this race to the way that they should, do they win the election? Does this anxiety overcome the former president, and does it actually show that they are now waking up and realizing that just wait a minute, the race isn't as strong for us as we thought? Because the early voting numbers are showing good results for Kamala Harris. The stunts they're pulling, in many cases, are backfiring. And Donald Trump is visiting a number of states that he previously said were locked and secured in. No real purpose in visiting the states if we're locked and secured. Well, then why is he in North Carolina more than Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, Wisconsin? Why is it that he's visiting these states and not other ones? You have to ask, but we don't have those numbers readily available. And so I think it's a combination of factors that have ultimately led to Donald Trump's feelings of anxiety and the Trump team's concerns about whether or not they can actually win this election. Because as of right now, I wouldn't be confident if I was on Team Trump. As I said yesterday, I would rather be in the position of Vice President Harris. The trajectory is on her side, and similar to that of 2016, that last-minute momentum swing is not actually favoring the former president, but actually favoring Kamala Harris. So it's a bit of a flip from 2016. It's something that does make a difference, though, in the overall outcome, because the late breakers, as mentioned by the Harris campaign, and especially a number of polls that do show that in these final days, those who are making up their decision over the next 2 days are leaning towards the vice president and swinging towards the Democratic electorate in a way that we hadn't previously seen a few weeks ago. Very interesting to see if Kamala Harris ends up holding her own, and if Donald Trump's campaign team, which has now been engulfed by anxiety, including the candidate himself, comes to realize that maybe some of their decisions came far too late in the game, or some of their decisions were just incorrect and should have never been done, and whether or not they win the election, time will tell us. But as of now, it doesn't seem like the Trump team is as confident as they were a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. And honestly, there's good reason to not be confident on Donald Trump's side. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.